So we're gonna talk about some of the mistakes and obstacles that people run into as they age or their parents age, and I'm going to kick off with issues around diagnosis and understanding the diagnosis or not understanding diagnosis, and then issues around insurance. So first of all, we'll talk about diagnosis and why that's important. I deal with people who have dementia, so specifically in a dementia situation, getting the proper diagnosis is critical. And that's because there's over 170 different kinds of irreversible dementia. So you want to know what you're dealing with. And a lot of times with families, what I see is we know something's not quite right. We get mom or dad to the doctor. The doctor does a few tests, says something in medical terminology that we don't quite understand, and he says, okay, well, take this pill and I'll see you in 6 months. And that's kind of as far as we go. And a lot of times we don't understand what's coming, and so there's not a plan, we're not prepared, we're not quite sure what this means, and that can be dangerous. If you have an industrious little type A adult child like me in the mix, then they may go home and Google whatever was just said or whatever was diagnosed and try to get some more information. It depends. Still may not understand what it is or what you're dealing with, and on top of that, you know, we have a tendency to deny. And I know Kelly's going to talk a little bit more about that, but we have a tendency to go, well, it's okay. And in dementia specifically, it's very common for families to say, well, mom's got a little bit of dementia, we've got some Aricept, and now we're okay, and we're going to move on. Not understanding that most dementias are progressive, and it's going to continue to get worse. It's never going to plateau, it's not going to get better. It's going to continue to get worse. And so because we don't know that, we don't do these other things that we're going to talk about. We don't understand these other things that are critical and important. And ultimately, the last mistake that we'll talk about, which is we don't formulate a plan. And therefore, we get in reactive mode, and we hit crisis hurdle after crisis hurdle after crisis hurdle. And that's always much more traumatic and much more expensive and tougher on the family and the person who's going. Yeah, we were talking about tips for when you do take a loved one to the doctor. So write your questions down ahead of time. If you can have somebody else attend the appointment as well, that maybe can take notes, and that way those notes can be shared with the family. Another good thing is to tell them right then and there, I would like all notes, all copies of medical notes. So typically what happens, we go to the doctor, they do some tests, they write everything in your chart, and you never get to see that document. And so 2 months later, when you need to know what's going on, or maybe you switch doctors, or you want to explain it to a family member, you don't have anything. You have to remember what the doctor said. So they're your medical records. I always ask for copies of everything, and I just keep a file. So with my mom, I have this huge medical file, and every time we go to the doctor, it's just make me a copy right now. Because if you ask for them later, they charge you. So make me a copy right now, and I just add it right to her file. And so that way when I'm looking back at what's going on, or if we change doctors, so for example, we decided we needed to see a neurologist, I had her whole medical history right here. You're like, oh my gosh, this is great. It answered a lot of questions. It saved us from having to retest. So they didn't need to do a CAT scan because we had just done one 3 months ago. And they could look at those results and have that right there. So that's really, really helpful. And ultimately, you know, you want to, once you do have a diagnosis, I guess first you have to make sure you have a doctor that's going to get you one. Doctors are just like anybody else. There's good ones and there's bad ones. So if you don't like what you hear, somebody's not working with you, they're not answering questions, find another doctor. Just find another doctor. We're often, we see doctors as authority figures, and we're afraid to challenge, especially the senior generation. That doctors are authority figures. The doctor said, I don't challenge that. But some doctors are good, some doctors aren't. And some really good doctors aren't trained in certain things. So, again, if you're dealing with something specific, a family practitioner may not be specific enough. So if I have chest pain, I'm probably going to go see a cardiologist. All right? I'm probably not going to just go see a family doc. I might start there. But if I have continued chest pain and pressure and heart attack-like symptoms, I'm going to go see a cardiologist. So the same type of thing. You want to make sure you're seeing the right type of doctor for whatever the symptom is, and that you're getting answers and you're feeling like you have enough. Great to do the research on the internet. Find other people or associations. So, example for dementia, the Alzheimer's Association, Lewy Bodies Association, whatever. Lots of free education information there. And then from there, you can start formulating a plan because you know what to expect. There's nothing worse with progressive disease than not knowing what to expect, and then, of course, something happens, you're caught off guard, you're in crisis mode, and we don't make good decisions when we're in crisis mode. So we want to be proactive. The next thing that's really important to understand is, what are your options with insurance? So what does Medicare pay for? Excuse me, what don't they? What does long-term care insurance pay for? What doesn't it? What does supplemental insurance pay for? What doesn't it? I found this one out the hard way. So my mother has Medicare, and she has supplemental insurance, and she also has long-term care insurance. She fell and broke both her wrists. She came out of the hospital after a 4-day stay, and according to Medicare, would have been eligible for up to 100 days of rehab, paid for by Medicare. She was living in an assisted living facility, and they said, come rehab here, you'll be back in your own home. Because that was her home. Your cat's here, this is great. Will insurance pay for it? I was told yes. I was told yes by Medicare, I was told yes by supplemental, and I was told yes by the facility. What she needed while she was rehabbing was what we call custodial care. So basically, she didn't need a nurse, she just needed someone to help her to the bathroom, to blow her nose, to feed her. She had 2 arms in casts, and she has dementia. So she just needed someone to make sure she wasn't going to hurt herself, and that somebody could act as her hands for her. So after 8 weeks of getting through that, and 24-hour care, I had a $30,000 bill. Medicare doesn't cover that, because that's called custodial care. Medicare covers things that are medical, so an RN or a doctor needs to do them. This didn't require an RN or a doctor. It required a companion, a CNA, home health care aide, someone like that. There was no injections, no IVs, nothing that required any kind of skilled medical training. So it's called custodial care. Medicare doesn't cover that in those types of instances. Sometimes it will in specific instances, but usually not. Her supplemental insurance doesn't cover that because, again, it's not a medical, it's not a nurse that has to do it. Her long-term care insurance does cover that. But her long-term care insurance was maxed out. So we couldn't utilize that. So there was a $30,000 bill that got paid out of pocket. Now, that could have been avoided had we gone to a rehab facility that accepted Medicare. The assisted living facility we were at did not. She could have gotten some rehab. She probably would not have been eligible for 100 days worth. But the rehab that might have been required with her physical therapy, we probably could have gotten Medicare to pay for some of that. But it's tricky. And that 100 days all depends on when you plateau and when you stop progressing, when you stop making improvements. Then they can stop it. So you're not guaranteed that 100 days. The physical therapist and the occupational therapist and the doctors say, well, you're not benefiting from this therapy anymore, therefore we're done. So it's tricky, and it's important to get with somebody who's an expert who can help you understand. So what pays for what? I have a lot of clients who'll come to me and say, I'm not worried about it, Medicare will take care of it. Medicare does not pay for assisted living. It doesn't pay for most of those types of things. There's rehab situations where it will help, but most people think that once I get older, if I need some help or I'm in trouble, Medicare will pay for it. That's not what it does. So it's really important to make sure that you understand your policies and you understand your options, and that you're covered in one way or another. And not to get into the trap of denial, which is where I'm going to pass it over to Kelly, because she's going to talk a little bit about that.
Hi, my name is Kelly Stokesbury, and I'm an occupational therapist by trade, but I'm also a certified life care planner. And what that means is that I help people who either have had a catastrophic injury, like a car accident or a brain injury, as well as people who have a chronic disability or a disease process, map out all their future medical needs. So I kind of know how to navigate through the continuum of medical care as a disease process or an injury progresses, as well as the financial aspects that go along with that. So I'm going to talk first and foremost about denial. And one of my favorite quotes about denial is that I'm not in denial, I'm just selective about the reality that I choose to accept. And I think we all do that. I think, there's 2 forms of denial when it comes to medical things. First of all, I think we all kind of operate under the assumption that I'm healthy, I'm always going to be healthy, things will always be status quo. I'm going to age and life will be wonderful and retirement will be grand. And in the grand scheme of things, that's what we all hope for, but unfortunately it doesn't always work out that way. The other kind of denial is the one that Jamie touched on a little bit, and that is when you hear a diagnosis, whether it be a very minor diagnosis such as hypertension in the grand scheme of things, or if it's something that is life-threatening such as cancer, typically we put up a front, and the first stage that you go through is denial. So I thought we'd start with looking at some statistics, which is why I'm going to use my cheat sheet here. But the population obviously is aging rapidly. By 2030, it's expected that there will be over 71 million adults who are over age 65, and approximately 10 million adult children who are age 50 to 65 will be caring for aging parents as well. So there's a real crisis coming in terms of being prepared financially for taking care of somebody who is aging. The average life expectancy right now is somewhere between 82 to 85 years of age, depending upon whether you're a male or female. Women typically are 3 times as likely to be widowed and 2 times as likely to live alone. So women typically live longer, and we also have a tendency to stay by ourselves. So they tend to be a little bit more costly as we age. And my husband would tell you we're a little more costly when we're alive too. One of the things that I think medical knowledge has allowed is that not only are we living longer, but we're living longer sicker. And approximately 80% of people over age 65 right now have a chronic disease, and that's only going to continue to escalate. Those chronic diseases that we see most frequently in the aging population, unfortunately, are also the 5 most expensive diagnoses that exist. Heart disease, which is actually the #1 killer of people age 50 and over in the United States, is very expensive. And cancer, trauma, mental disorders, so that includes your dementias and your Alzheimer's, as well as the pulmonary conditions. A lot of elderly people have COPD, congestive heart failure, and asthma. So that kind of is a little bit about the medical history. But we also start to experience physical limitations, even in those individuals who are completely healthy or have just a few minor diagnoses. As we age, naturally, we start to decline physically. So approximately 38% of people over the age of 65 will tell you that they have difficulty with bending, stooping, lifting, reaching, walking, all of those things that are required to function. And as a result, we also see in that population that they start to need assistance with bathing, dressing, housekeeping, grocery shopping, those kinds of things. And it starts out incrementally. The 65 to 75-year-old population will require a little bit of assistance, but by the time you start surveying people who are 75 to 85 and above, roughly about 20 to 30% of those people who are living at home are contracting people to come into the house and provide those services. And then the rest of them, a lot of them are institutionalized at that point in time. Going back to some of the diseases that we talked about, congestive heart failure, and I know Patrick is dealing with this a lot in his business right now. It's the most common diagnosis in people who are hospitalized over the age of 65 and currently affects about 4.8 million adults. Heart disease in and of itself costs between $16,000 and $30,000 a year for those individuals who suffer that disease. And that's not counting the home health and the medications. That's just hospitalizations and doctor's visits. So these diseases are really, really expensive and require some attention. Alzheimer's disease, as Jamie was talking about, currently affects 5.2 million Americans. As of the statistics that are available right now, it's 1 in 8 people over the age of 65. It's estimated as the population continues to grow that number will continue to increase. And once you turn 85, it's 1 in 2 people. So 50% of people over the age of 85 have Alzheimer's in this country. The average survival for an individual with Alzheimer's is 4 to 8 years after diagnosis. But for those individuals who are diagnosed early or who have early onset, they can survive up to 20 years. Unfortunately, about 40% of the survival years are spent in the severe stages. So if you're looking at a life expectancy of 8 years, 4 to 5 of those years are going to be spent in a facility requiring pretty extensive care. 75% of people who have Alzheimer's or other dementias are admitted to a nursing home by the time they're age 80, which is one of the reasons why it's such an expensive disease to take care of. So, talking about those costs, then obviously we need to look at the big picture, which is mistake number 6, I think. So frequently, I think when we start to set out on a financial plan for our future and we think about medical things, you hear a diagnosis of cancer, so immediately you think, well, I'm going to have treatment. But you may not think beyond that. Or you think about a diagnosis of Alzheimer's and you think, okay, I know I'm going to need a memory care unit at some point in time. But there's actually this huge picture that needs to be looked at that goes into caring for somebody with a disease process. In addition to personal care, how much are the medications going to cost? Even when you have Medicare, long-term care insurance, the Medicare D supplements, there's usually still some sort of out-of-pocket fee that has to be paid above and beyond that. Are you going to need therapy? If you've had a stroke, who's going to pay for physical, occupational, and speech therapy? How long is Medicare going to cover that? Is there a copay for those expenses? How are you going to progress through the continuum of care? Is home health feasible? How long is that going to be feasible? At what point in time do you need to look at moving into an assisted living facility? At what point in time does that cease to be feasible and you need to look at moving into a nursing home or a memory care unit? So how are you going to navigate through that and who's going to finance that? And then looking at just who is available to help. Even if you're in an assisted living facility, they don't necessarily always have transportation available. How are you going to get to your doctor's appointments? How are you going to get the groceries that you need to make breakfast in the morning? Who's going to socialize with you? Who's going to pick you up to take you to your grandson's wedding or graduation or those kinds of things? So there's really a lot more than people take into consideration when they're thinking about the future. Going back to the drug costs, this is specific to Alzheimer's disease, but just for an example, the average cost of prescription medications for an individual with Alzheimer's disease, and this is FDA-approved drugs, this is not the trial drugs, on average across the United States is $4,000 a year. That's out of pocket. That's not counting what the insurance company has already paid for those drugs. So medications are really expensive. Approximately 45% of expenses related to nursing home care or facility care are paid out of pocket. About 26% of the prescription drug costs are paid out of pocket. And then this one kind of surprised me. I had stumbled across this before, but 77% of dental care over the age of 65 is paid out of pocket. And I think that's because as you age, you're having crowns and bridges and dentures and those things that the insurance companies don't typically pay for. And this was an astonishing number, kind of eye-opening for those of you that haven't looked into these statistics. But in 2008, they did a study of the average healthcare expenses across the country. And for the working population, and I think they qualified that as like age 25 through 64, their average healthcare expenses were about $3,000. Somebody 65 and over was spending on average $11,000 in healthcare, so 3 times the amount that somebody who is working is spending. So that kind of emphasizes or brought home to me how much, not just the age and the physical disabilities, but what an increase we see in medical costs associated with chronic diseases. She hit briefly upon some of the costs associated with the Barrington specifically, but this is actually from a MetLife study, and these are specific to Indiana, just to give you a rough ballpark figure. In $2010, a semi-private room in a nursing home in the state of Indiana would cost you $63,000 a year. A private room is going to cost you almost $80,000 a year. If you are in a memory care unit in that same nursing home, that same semi-private room is going to run you $75,000 a year, and that same private room is going to run upwards of $83,000 a year. That includes your room and board. That includes the nurses who are caring for you. That includes the nurses who are coming in and managing your medications, but it does not include your medications. You have to pay for those still out of pocket. It includes your personal care and then any social activities. So it doesn't include, again, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. The doctor's still going to bill you, just as though you were going to see him in your doctor's office. It doesn't include ancillary charges. My grandmother's in a nursing home. She gets her haircut done once a week. She gets her nails painted once a week. If the family's not available to do laundry, you're going to pay for that. They can nickel and dime you to death. So those numbers don't include all those little ancillary charges. an assisted living facility for a one-bedroom with a private bathroom in the state of Indiana, the base rate is $34,000 a year. Same bedroom with a private bathroom and a memory care unit is about $57,000 a year. So it shows you the difference. A one-bedroom private bath and assisted living memory care, $57,000. That same private room in a nursing home was $83,000. So getting more care, obviously, in the nursing home. Again, in the assisted living facilities, they have a base rate. That room base rate includes room and board, 2 or more meals daily. A lot of them in Indiana serve 3 meals, and housekeeping. It may or may not include personal care. They call themselves assisted care facilities, but a lot of them don't tell you when you move in that their base rate does not include personal care services. So they may charge you for toileting. They may charge you to have somebody come in and help you bathe and dress in the morning or get ready for bed at night. There's upcharges for if a nurse needs to come in and get your medications ready for you at the beginning of the week. If that nurse needs to come in every time you need to take a pill, they will charge for that. Again, laundry, housekeeping, those kinds of things are additional cost charges, and you are still responsible, again, for getting your own medications. Home health, Patrick can probably address this a little bit, but the Indiana state average for a home health aide, and a home health aide is somebody who is qualified to provide hands-on care. So that person can come in and help you bathe, they can help you toilet, they can actually put their hands on you and physically assist you. But the average cost for a home health aide, according to MetLife, is $22 an hour versus a homemaker, which is companion care. So that person's not allowed to physically touch you. They can supervise you, they can be companion, they can socialize with you, take you to places, doctor's appointments, those kinds of things, but they don't typically provide care, is $19 an hour. So if you needed 24-hour care, 365 days a year for the home health aide, you're looking at $193,000 a year. For the companion care, you're looking at $167,000 a year. So a lot of times, people, I think, have this wonderful connotation that, oh, I'm going to stay in my house and I'll just hire these people to come in. And that's grand if you can financially afford it. We all would like to be at home, but you have to look at the big picture and see what's feasible with what you have available financially. And as Jamie said, Medicare will cover a home health aide. They will cover that personal care attendant if there's a nurse in the home or a therapist in the home. But if it's just that personal care attendant coming in, then they don't cover it and you're paying out of pocket again. And the companion care is never covered by Medicare. That is always funded privately. And then another option that some people will utilize, it's kind of starting to take hold a little bit more in Indiana, is adult day centers. I think historically they've been used more for the developmentally delayed population, but they're starting to become more accepted for the aging population with dementia. And the average rate in Indiana for that is $77 a day. So if you were to figure that you're going to send your loved one to an adult day center 5 days a week for 52 weeks a year, you're looking at about $20,000. And then typically those people will bring in a companion care person to get them ready in the morning, get them ready for bed at night. So it kind of gives you a little ballpark expenditure-wise, kind of just a ballpark average depending upon diagnosis. If you are looking at an assisted living facility or a nursing home care at some point in time, you're easily looking at about $100,000 plus per year if you put everything together, care, medications, any ancillary charges and things. So, all right. So I'm going to turn it over to Patrick then, because he's going to tell you how to make sure that you pick the right person to provide that care.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of fun stuff here, huh? My name is Patrick Broccolo, and I own a company called Senior One Care. And everything we've been talking about here is kind of what we went through with our family. My story starts with my grandmother-in-law, who was living by herself in a rural town outside Lafayette. And she had cancer for about 7 years, and wasn't very aggressive, but every quarter she'd need chemotherapy treatments. And, for 2 weeks there, she'd be knocked out and needed some folks to come in and help her with everyday activities of daily living. We had a real difficult time finding reliable people to help her out. There were no senior living environments in the area, and we didn't want to move her into a nursing home. We wanted her to stay home. She was very independent. She was 95, sharp as a tack, and one of my favorite stories was 2 years before, or a couple weeks ago, about a month before she passed away, she told her daughters, I need to get my driver's license renewed, okay, because it was about to expire. Now, she drove every once in a while to church, was down the street, and her daughters were, very nervous about this process, and called their brother, who is my father-in-law, Carl, and said, you got to talk to Mom. Talk her out of this. She doesn't need to do all this. Do whatever you have to do whatever you have to do to get her out of it. So he goes down and he visits her, and he says, Mom, you don't want to get your driver's license renewed. You got to take the eye exam. You got to parallel park. You got to take all these tests. It's not worth it. It's going to be all the lines there. And she said, Carl, you don't know what you're talking about. I have my own line. I walk in. All I have to do is pass the eye exam, and I get my new driver's license renewed. So that was just, she knew it. She was sharp as a tack, knew all about it, very independent. But it was one of those funny stories that us children and grandchildren, stress about and deal with on a daily basis. So make a long story short, we designed the whole company around her and what she needed when she was living in her home. I think the common theme today is that Medicare does not pay for everything. AARP did a study a couple of years ago, and they asked their membership a bunch of questions, and one of them was, who's going to pay for all your long-term care? And 57% said Medicare is going to pay for every single dime. And I hope today you've seen that that's not necessarily the case. But the other thing to note, too, is you need to know your options and what's out there. Not only senior living environments, but home care and great resources that you've heard from already. I'm going to touch a little bit on what Kelly was talking about, the home care aspect, custodial care. I've heard it called companion care, homemakers, and who to hire and what some of your risks are involved in that, which we learned kind of the hard way with our grandmother, but many clients that many families that we've worked with recently have also fallen into some hard times because of it. What we're talking about here is quality of life, and what types of things you want or need as you age. And when picking caregivers, families are doing two options. One, they're hiring agencies, or they're hiring family and friends, or private duty employers, independent contractors out there to do this work. And if you're hiring independent contractors, you have to realize that the family becomes the employer. It's just like hiring someone to trim your trees or do your lawn service. They're all independent contractors. But you're hiring people to take care of your loved ones. Okay, so there needs to be a level of training there because you're incurring all this risk. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I met an attorney today who told me of a client who hired private duty caregivers to help one of their clients. She was transferring Dad from the chair to his wheelchair and hurt her back. And she went home and she did what any worker would do and file a workers' comp claim. And because she was an independent contractor, who was the employer? The family. The family's the employer. So what happens is that claim went through, and now the family is paying for that workers' compensation liability, which was a dollar amount that was quite large that obviously they weren't anticipating, but it's a risk of hiring independent contractors. Another one to consider as well is payroll taxes. Remember, you're the employer. So you're responsible for paying payroll taxes as well as the caregiver. I know one case we got last year, she had 3 independent contractors who were working around the clock, and one of them claimed income. And the IRS called and said, "Who's your employer?" And the answer was the family, right? So the family hadn't been paying half the payroll taxes, nor was the caregiver. And so that 4 years of back taxes was then charged to the family. So it's not, I don't want you to discourage you from hiring private duty caregivers, but those are 2 major questions, 2 major risks that you need to make sure are in order so that you're protected. Okay, and I'll tell you what, it's the better thing to do is to look at the agency side of things. These are companies that hire caregivers, and you have to make sure that they are employees of that agency and that they are not, for instance, a staffing agency who hire independent contractors, because again, those risks of liability and taxes fall on the family. I think one area that gets overlooked sometimes is the level of training for these individuals, whether they're private or with an agency. It's important to note what kind of training these folks have. For example, our agency, we are specialized in Alzheimer's and dementia, so we have a huge Alzheimer's dementia training program for our caregivers. We primarily hire certified nurse aides and home health aides. The reason for that is there is a very large population of people who are currently in the hospital right now for a completely preventable accident or concern if they had the right caregiver or the properly trained person working with them. And so if our premise when we were hiring for starting our company is if we had the properly trained folks there, they can help prevent a lot of these issues. Instead of calling an ambulance, you're calling a doctor or you're calling a nurse to help get through the situation before it becomes an emergency. And I think we can all understand that when that emergency happens, there's a lot of stress, whether it's the spouse of the person or in many cases it's the adult children or it's the grandchildren that are managing these situations for folks. So that's a really important piece when hiring somebody. Another thing to consider as well, if you are hiring these caregivers, these independent contractors, remember you're managing them. So what happens if someone can't make the shift that day? Emergencies pop up all the time. I can attest to that. I have a lot of caregivers that we manage, and there are issues that pop up. How do you manage that? With us, we cover it ourselves. We'll do it ourselves. We'll run out, we'll cover the shift. We've never missed a shift since we started our company. But if it was an independent contractor, then what happens? And the answer is you become Plan B. You have to figure it out who that is and manage it and find a replacement or call off work or whatever the situation may be. So managing that situation is a stress level in itself. So it's just another thought process to think about when it comes to managing some of these issues and these chronic diseases. It's imperative that you have the right kind of caregivers in place. One thing that really surprised us when we began this company is that we thought everything, all of our service would be in somebody's house, whether it was the parent's house or their adult children's house. And what we found is about 80% of the work we do are in senior living environments. We are helping folks stay in assisted living. We are helping folks stay in memory care, or we're helping them stay in the independent living side of the building so they don't have to move to the nursing home because they don't want to move to the nursing home. But I think Kelly and Jamie have touched on it already. There is a financial implication for that. There are finances to cover that. Medicare does not cover that kind of a service. So if someone is, we have a client right now and she falls frequently and she's been going to the hospital a lot, and they need somebody there to prevent her from falling, And what's actually happened is that because we have the right people there, they're actually getting her engaged in the activities as well within the building. We found that she's eating better. She's not restless on the overnights anymore because she knows somebody is there. And so the quality of life has exceeded in that aspect of it. So, and she gets to stay with all her friends, and she loves the bingo. Every month she loves her bingo night, so she gets to stay involved with her friends. So those are really a couple of things to think about when it comes to caregiving in general. I also wanted to touch partly on the planning aspect of this. I never get a call from somebody that says, my mother is going to fall in 6 months, and I think it would be important that we get some care in here. Okay, I never do, obviously, for obvious reasons. And I'll give you an example. I have a flashlight in my house right now. The batteries have not worked in over a year. And every month, my wife tells me, when you're out, make sure you get the batteries for the flashlight. This is going on for over 12 months, and my wife jokes about it all the time. When am I going to buy batteries for that flashlight? Right? It's when my basement, the power goes out, the basement starts flooding because the sump pump doesn't work, right? And I'm going to be like, oh boy, I need to go get some batteries now, okay? So we're very reactionary. The reason I tell that story, these decisions are being made in crisis. And when you make these decisions in crisis, the wrong choices are made. So you don't have a lot of knowledge maybe of all the communities that are out there, and it might not be a good fit for your loved one. So I encourage you to start thinking about those processes. What are the options out there? What does Medicare pay for? What are the different resources we need if my parents or in-laws have been diagnosed with something like Alzheimer's dementia? It's important to have those conversations now, not only with the professionals that are out there in this industry, but also with your parents or in-laws or yourselves. When my grandmother-in-law passed away, the first thing the estate planning attorney said was, we need your husband's death certificate. Well, where was that? We didn't know where that was. We found a lot of pigeonholes in her house, but we never found the death certificate. So it took a couple weeks to go prove to the whole health, the people out there that we were relatives, and when he had passed away and that type of thing, there was a cost involved in all that. So one of the things that we tell families is start talking about this now. What are your wishes? Do you want to stay home for the rest of your life? If you do, what kind of resources do we need in order to accomplish that? Do you want to move into a memory care unit? Do you want to move into an assisted living environment? If so, what are some of the amenities that you want? And then when you go out, you have an idea of what these various buildings offer and what they don't offer. And one of the things we tell people, where are your important documents? If something happened to you today, would your significant other or your children or your parents, would they be able to find those documents easily to encourage, to make sure the next steps are taken in the right direction? So that's a little bit about some of the options out there. Crisis happens, and it's important to know there are people out there that can help. And we didn't realize it until it was too late. And I hear from a lot of families that say, I wish I had heard about you sooner. And I think if they started the planning process and having these conversations with each other, or even thinking about it themselves, there'd be a lot less stress in the world today. So I'm going to turn it over to Alice, and she's going to talk a little bit more on the financial side of things. So thank you.
Good. I'm Alice Howe. I'm Director of Financial Planning for Beakley Horse Advisors, and just 3 keys that I want to wrap up with in terms of the planning element and how important that is. First, related especially to this area, you need the right people on your side. You need qualified experts who have had the years of experience that can step in so you're not making a lot of painful mistakes and wasting a lot of valuable time. And speaking of time, as Patrick mentioned,
time is something you can't save for the future, so the sooner that you can start this whole process and not be reactive, the better. And that comes into play with what we do. You need, from a financial standpoint, someone that can be a quarterback for you as an individual, as a family, who can bring in the experts to help get the job done. So that's part of what we do, is when you're at that point, to bring in the individuals such as you've seen today to help you make, which is the second key, well, ask the right questions, having the right people and asking the right questions. We often hear, well, you need the right answers. Well, that's not going to happen if you're not asking the right questions. And that's, again, where you don't know what you don't know, and that's where it's so important to have qualified, experienced experts to help you, especially in this arena. Because it's not just money we're talking about, it's people's lives and quality of life and people that you care about. So that's the second key, just making sure you get the right questions to be answered. And then thirdly is just having the right solutions. And that's, again, where you have experts who can point you in the right direction, who have the right resources. So again, you're going to have that peace of mind from taking proactive steps and not being in a crisis mode, and just really looking to others to help you. And really, it just takes a team of people. One aspect is just money, but again, we're talking about so much more than that. We're talking about people you care about, again, the peace of mind, the quality of life. So that's a big picture. The money is a driver of that, but again, it's quarterbacking and bringing in the experts in advance and planning ahead, and that's what our goal will be going forward.